Before we get into the story, please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments. My name is Leanna. I'm 36 years old, and today I want to talk about an experience that has touched me deeply, something I shared with my nephew Jalen. It was a connection that unfolded gradually, starting on a quiet evening in Maruga. My husband, Aaron, had been working tirelessly on a big project in Dala for months. His days were filled with long hours at the construction site, leaving our home quieter and emptier than ever. It had become common for him to leave early in the morning and return late at night, if at all. This routine meant that we rarely saw each other, and the little moments we used to share had all but disappeared. I remember feeling particularly drained and lonely that night, weighed down by a sense of emptiness that had been slowly creeping in over the past few weeks. I decided to go to bed early, hoping that the silence of the empty house would give me some much-needed rest. As I lay there, enveloped in the silence, I began to drift off to sleep, feeling a rare sense of peace and comfort. But then something stirred me from my slumber. At first I thought I was dreaming. Slowly opening my eyes, I saw my nephew, Jalen, standing at the foot of my bed. He was holding a notebook and looking slightly anxious, as if he didn't want to disturb me but had no choice. "Sorry to wake you, Leanna, but I need this notebook for a university assignment, and I couldn't find it anywhere else," he said, his voice soft and apologetic. Jalen had always been polite and considerate, so his unexpected presence in my room at this hour took me by surprise. Still half asleep, I sat up, adjusted my nightgown, and managed to give him a gentle, reassuring smile. "Don't worry, Jalen, it's all right." "Why don't you sit down for a while?" I said, gesturing to a chair by my bed. He seemed hesitant, but after a moment's pause, he accepted the invitation and sat down. As he did so, we began to chat, and our conversation naturally turned to his studies. Jalen was in his final year at university, and he explained how demanding this last stretch had been for him. He talked about his workload, the pressure of exams, and the late nights spent studying. As he spoke, I was captivated by the maturity in his voice and the thoughtfulness of his expression. It struck me that Jalen was no longer the boy I remembered, but a young man with intelligence and sensitivity, qualities I had always admired in him. It was like seeing him through new eyes, recognizing the strength and determination he had cultivated over the years. At one point in the conversation, he paused and looked at me with a faint, shy smile. "Thank you for listening, Leanna." "Sometimes it's hard to find someone to talk to," he admitted. His honesty touched me deeply. It was then that I assured him that I would always be there to listen and support him, no matter what. And as I said these words, I felt a warmth in my heart, realizing how important this connection was to me. It was as if some of the loneliness I'd been carrying had been lifted, replaced by a real sense of closeness that I hadn't felt in a long time. That night marked the beginning of something new and unexpected between us. In the days that followed, I noticed that Jalen and I began to talk more often, and his presence became a welcome addition to my life. With Aaron gone, my days had felt monotonous and empty, but Jalen brought a sense of companionship and understanding that filled the void. Our conversations became a cherished part of my routine, a break in the silence that had settled over my life. As the weeks passed, my relationship with Jalen became a refuge, a space of warmth and support in the midst of loneliness. We often met in the kitchen, where he helped me prepare meals, or in my bedroom, where we talked about everything from his dreams and aspirations to the daily challenges he faced. It was in these moments that I came to appreciate the depth of our bond, a bond that offered me comfort, understanding, and a reminder of the beauty of human connection. Every evening spent in his company reminded me of the value of having someone to lean on, someone who truly listens and cares. And although it had started as a simple gesture, his visit soon became something I looked forward to, a quiet yet profound connection that brought light into my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. One night, after many of our late-night conversations, there was an almost imperceptible shift between us. We were sitting together, and Jalen, always curious and thoughtful, asked a question that took me by surprise. He looked at me and said, "Liana, have you ever considered following your dreams? You've been so supportive of everyone else, but what about what you want?" The question took me by surprise because, to be honest, no one had asked me that in a long time. His sincerity stirred something deep inside me, reminding me of the passions and aspirations I had once held dear. I answered him honestly, telling him about the dreams I'd once had and how they had slowly faded into the background as I built a life with Aaron. Although Aaron and I had a stable life, it often felt like a comfortable trap, especially with the endless hours he devoted to his work. Over time, the constant distance created a quiet space between us, and the feeling of being alone, even within a marriage, had begun to creep in. Jalen listened with an expression of empathy and understanding that was both comforting and profound. "It must be hard, Auntie," he said gently. "I've always seen you as a strong person, but we all need someone to lean on." His words struck a chord with me. I had always played the role of the caretaker, the one who kept everything in order, but I had forgotten how much I needed support, understanding, and, most of all, someone who could truly see me. It was then that I realized that Jalen's youth and empathy brought me a comfort I hadn't realized I was craving. As the evening progressed, our conversation flowed naturally. We laughed, shared stories, and talked about things we'd never talked about before. The bond we shared felt deeper than ever, and the connection between us seemed to take on new life. There was a warmth in Jalen's smile and an intensity in his gaze that I couldn't ignore, try as I might. It was as if he could see right through me, and I began to feel things I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a very long time. There was a vulnerability in me that night, a vulnerability that found comfort in his presence. It was then that Jalen gently broke through my thoughts and suggested I get some rest. As he got up to leave, he assured me that he would always be there if I needed him. When I was finally alone in the dark, my thoughts drifted back to him, and a mixture of emotions washed over me. I knew even then that I was thinking about him more than I probably should. In the weeks that followed, Jalen's presence became more frequent, especially in the evenings when Aaron worked late. Our interactions, which had once been light-hearted and supportive, gradually became more profound. One afternoon, feeling overwhelmed by the widening gap between Aaron and me, I texted Jalen. True to form, he was there in no time, ready to listen and offer comfort. We sat together in the garden, our usual conversation flowing, but I sensed something different that night. There was a depth to Jalen's gaze that made me shiver, a gaze that was no longer that of a nephew, but of a man. And in that look, I felt a spark, an awakening of feelings I had kept hidden for so long. At one point, as he reached down to pick up a fallen notebook, our hands briefly touched. The touch was fleeting, but it ignited a spark that was undeniable. Our eyes met, and in that silent exchange I could see that he felt it too. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his voice filled with a mixture of concern and something deeper. I nodded, struggling to make sense of the intensity of the moment. We sat in silence until he finally spoke, breaking the spell. "Liana, this isn't right," he whispered, though I could see the same conflict in his eyes. I pulled my hand back, but even as I did, I knew these feelings were not ones I could easily put aside. The first real moment between us happened one night when the tension between us was undeniable. We were talking as we often did, but this time there was an unmistakable change in the air. The conversation took on a more personal tone, and I felt we were crossing an invisible line. At one point, Jalen leaned over to pick up something he had dropped, and our hands touched again. But this time it wasn't a simple brush of fingers. His hand lingered, his fingers intertwined with mine, sending a shiver through my entire body. Our eyes met, and in that moment the desire I had kept hidden surfaced, burning and undeniable. I'm not sure what's happening, but I can't ignore it, I whispered, my voice shaking with the weight of what I was admitting. Jalen looked at me with a softness in his eyes and replied, I don't know either, Leanna, but maybe we can face it together. He wrapped me in a hug that spoke of warmth, comfort, and something deeper. As I held on to him, feeling the strength of his body against mine, I knew there was no turning back. The longing I had suppressed for so long had finally broken free. Our lips met in a kiss that began hesitantly, soft and searching, but as our emotions rose, it became intense, carrying with it the pent-up feelings we had both been hiding. In that moment, all thoughts of right and wrong seemed to vanish, and the only thing that mattered was the closeness we shared. After that first kiss, everything seemed to fall into an overwhelming silence, a moment suspended in time. Our hearts were racing, both of us struggling to catch our breath as the weight of what had just happened settled in. We had crossed a line from which there was no turning back, and yet there was a strange sense of relief, a sense of fulfillment. I felt his warmth pressing against me, our bodies still intertwined, but there was an underlying tension, a rush of emotion that we could both barely comprehend. This is crazy, I whispered, my voice barely audible, shaking with the intensity of the feelings I was experiencing. I could still feel the heat of his lips on mine, and it made my heart race again just thinking about it. But there was also fear. Fear of what this meant for us, for the future. Jalen nodded, his voice soft but steady. I know, Leanna, he said, but I can't help it. I need to be close to you. There was something in his words that hit me hard, something deep and raw, and I realized how deeply he felt the same pull I did. Despite the crazy, overwhelming circumstances, he dared to speak his truth. Without saying a word, I let myself be swept away by the moment. Every thought in my head seemed to disappear, and all I could focus on was him, his presence, his touch, the fire that was igniting between us. I embraced him again, letting the kiss become more intense, more urgent. The room seemed to get warmer, and the air was thick with passion, as if every inch of space between us was electrified. It was as if nothing else mattered at that moment. The outside world ceased to exist. It was just him and me, our emotions intertwined, our hearts beating as one. Before we knew it, we were on the bed, our bodies pressed together in an uncontrollable dance of passion. It wasn't just physical desire, it felt like something deeper was happening. An undeniable connection, a meeting of souls. The way our bodies fit together was as if we had always been meant to be in this moment. There was no more fear, no more hesitation, only surrender. Everything that had held us back before now felt distant, irrelevant. In the calm after the storm of passion, it felt as if we had finally found something we had both been searching for, something neither of us had realized we needed until it was right in front of us. That night, as we finally drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace. A deep, fulfilling peace that I hadn't felt in years. It was the kind of peace that makes you feel like everything is finally right, even if it's just for a fleeting moment. But even as I lay there, my body wrapped in his warmth, my mind was clouded by a deeper, darker thought. I knew that this happiness, this stolen happiness, came at a price. It was not a price we could easily pay, and the consequences of our actions could not be ignored. The doubts began to creep in, quietly at first, but growing louder as the night wore on. In the weeks that followed, we kept our relationship a secret, our meetings marked by an underlying sense of urgency and excitement. Every encounter felt like it could be the last, and the thrill of sneaking around added an adrenaline-fueled intensity to every touch, every kiss. We were careful, always careful, to leave no trace of our moments together. And yet each encounter left a mark on both of us, an indelible reminder of the forbidden love we were secretly nurturing. The secret itself was intoxicating, giving our time together a sense of urgency. But with that urgency came fear. Fear that we might be discovered, fear that the walls we had so carefully built around our secret might come crashing down at any moment. Yet we continued, unable to resist the magnetic pull between us. It was as if our souls were bound together by something too powerful to ignore, and each night we spent together was a brief, precious escape from the reality we had to face in the morning light. One night, as we lay in bed, the weight of our situation seemed heavier than ever. The quiet tension between us was palpable, and it felt as if something had changed. We were no longer just two people caught up in a moment of passion. Now we were on a path we weren't sure how to follow. Jalen turned to me, his eyes full of concern and something deeper, something like fear. "Liana, I don't know how much longer we can keep this up," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're playing with fire, and it's only a matter of time before we get burned. We have to be careful. We have to find a way to be together without risking everything." There was a seriousness in his voice, a weight to his words that I hadn't heard that before. He wasn't just speaking out of concern for us, he was speaking out of a deep sense of fear that it could all come crashing down around us. His words hit me harder than I had expected. I knew that what he was saying was true. The risks we were taking were no longer abstract concepts. They were real, tangible risks that we couldn't ignore. I had always been the one to carry the burdens, to hold things together, but now I realized it was too much for me to carry alone. His gaze met mine, full of worry, but also something else, something that sparked a glimmer of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. "I know," I whispered, my voice trembling, the weight of his words settling heavily on my chest. "I can't be without you anymore. It's too late to go back. We've already gone too far, and I don't know if I could live with myself if I let this go." Jalen's expression softened, and he pulled me closer, wrapping his arms around me. "We can't afford to make mistakes," he said firmly, as if trying to convince us both that this was the only option left. "But maybe we can still be together if we're careful, if we take every step with caution. We have to be smart about this, Liana. We need to protect what we have." I nodded, my heart heavy but determined. We had crossed the line, and there was no going back. The decision had been made. We would keep our relationship a secret, knowing the dangers it posed, but unable to resist the bond that had grown between us. Every encounter would be a risk, but one we were both willing to take. We would live in the shadows, but we would live in each other's arms. The intensity of our love was undeniable, and neither of us was ready to let go, even if the consequences could destroy everything we held dear. So we made a pact, a silent agreement between the two of us. We would continue to see each other, continue to steal moments of happiness from the chaos of our lives. Always cautious, always careful. We would keep the truth hidden, aware of the dangers, but unwilling to let go of the love that had consumed us. It was a dangerous game, but the only one we knew how to play. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. The days and nights that followed were filled with love and fear, passion and anxiety. Every moment we spent together was both a gift and a risk, and the tension never quite dissipated. But we carried on, connected by something deeper than either of us could fully understand. Every kiss, every touch was a silent promise to face the consequences together, whatever they might be. One night, as we were together in my room, a sound suddenly broke the silence, an unexpected noise from the living room. My heart skipped a beat, and in a flash of panic, I pulled Jalen into the closet, hoping to stay hidden, to protect us from whatever might come next. Jalen's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear, and I could feel him shaking next to me. It was as if the walls we had carefully built around us were now threatening to collapse. I could hear my breath quickening, the guilt of what we were doing washing over me like a tidal wave. "It's too risky," I whispered, my voice barely audible, thick with the weight of the situation. Jalen nodded, his voice trembling. "We have to be more careful," he said. His words hit me with the hard truth of our reality. What we were doing couldn't continue without consequences. I agreed, feeling the weight of the truth settle in my chest. We had been lucky this time, but luck wouldn't protect us forever. We had to be smarter and more discreet, and yet the fear that had taken root in my heart only seemed to grow stronger. Even as we stood there, hidden in the small, cramped space, I noticed something in Jalen's eyes, a flicker of doubt. He wasn't entirely convinced that the suspicion had been cleared. I knew deep down that no matter how careful we tried to be, the truth had a way of rising to the surface. It wasn't just our actions, it was the guilt, the secrecy, and the way everything we touched seemed tainted by what we couldn't share with the world. 2 weeks had passed since that close call, and Jalen had become increasingly engrossed in his final exams. He was in the final stretch of his university career, with graduation looming on the horizon. His focus on his studies made him seem distant at times, but I knew he was under tremendous pressure. I, on the other hand, was sinking into a different kind of heaviness. I hadn't been feeling well for weeks, plagued by constant nausea that wouldn't go away. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just stress, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The emotional toll of everything we were doing, hiding, living in secrecy, was taking a physical toll on me, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I tried not to think about it too much, but the truth crept closer and closer. One day, when Aaron returned from a project he had been working on, he suggested we go on a trip together to celebrate. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to get away from the tension of the past few weeks, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing discomfort in my stomach. I mentioned that I wasn't feeling well and needed to go to the hospital. Concerned, Aaron immediately called a doctor to come to the house. The wait felt like an eternity, but when the doctor arrived, I had no idea how much my world was going to change in the next few hours. After a few tests, the doctor smiled, a warm, knowing look in his eyes. "Leanna," he said gently, "you are 2 months pregnant." The words hit me like a physical blow. My mind went blank for a moment, the room spinning around me. Pregnant? The realization washed over me, but I couldn't quite process it. I had been careful, hadn't I? But no amount of thinking could change the truth. Aaron looked at me, stunned. His expression was one of confusion and surprise. He began to wonder how this could have happened, how it was possible, given how long it had been since we had been intimate. I didn't have the answers. The weight of my actions, the choices I had made, weighed heavily on my chest. I agreed to go on the trip, hoping that a change of scenery would give me the space to think, to come to terms with what had happened. But when we got home, I knew the time had come to explain everything. The guilt in my stomach grew as I prepared for what I had to say. When I finally sat down with Aaron and told him the truth, the full, painful truth, he listened in silence. When I finished, he stood up, his face unreadable, his fists clenched at his sides. He packed his bags without another word, cutting off contact with me completely. My heart broke as I watched him walk away. The devastation was overwhelming. I could barely breathe, suffocated by the guilt that had consumed me. I had destroyed the trust in our relationship, and the man I once loved walked away without looking back. But even as Aaron's absence weighed on me, I couldn't deny the conflicting emotions inside me. Amidst the guilt and devastation, I realized that my feelings for Jalen had only deepened. It wasn't just the passion or the physical connection, it was something more. There was an undeniable bond that had formed between us, one that grew stronger with each passing moment. And even though I knew I'd made mistakes, big mistakes, I couldn't ignore how much I cared for him. I wasn't ready to give that up. But there was something else, something I couldn't reconcile. I didn't dare tell Jalen what had happened. I couldn't bring myself to reveal the full extent of my actions, hoping that somehow, some way, he could finish his internship at the university in peace. I didn't want to burden him with the consequences of our decisions. Now I find myself at a crossroads. I'm consumed by a storm of conflicting emotions, unable to make sense of what I've done or where this journey is taking me. I know I'm on a path I can't turn back from, but I'm not sure where it's going. The choices I've made have put me on the edge of something I'm not sure I can handle, and yet there's no escaping the consequences of this tangled web I've woven. I stand here torn between the love I've found with Jalen and the guilt that comes with it, questioning everything I thought I knew about myself, about love, and about the price we pay for our desires. And there you have it, a story full of complex emotions, choices, and the challenges of navigating relationships and self-discovery. Life often takes us on unexpected journeys, and this story reminds us of the delicate balance between desire, responsibility, and self-reflection. Now we want to hear from you. What did you learn from this story? Is there something about Liana's journey that resonates with you, or a particular insight that you found valuable? Comment below with one thing you've learned and how you might put it into practice in your own life. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.